Oh, recording. Okay, no, I got it to work. Okay, for some reason. Okay, perfect. Did you get it to work or I got it to work?
Go on, man. It's
Okay,
recording.
perfect, perfect. Yay, okay. Okay. Paul was about to come too. So he just sent me a message, so that's why I had to reply. Paul is from Holochain, so he would be a nice contribution too. Okay, so yeah. Somebody can share the presentation. Mysam, if you're there, can you share the presentation and share your screen, please? So we have everything at hand. And while we're doing that, we can start to get acquainted with who's in the room, just to establish in our heads the rules and all that. I don't know if you had time to read the facilitation, the methodology, but did you have time to take a look at it? Or do I have to go through it? Just a little bit? Okay, yes. So essentially what we're trying to do in the first part is to build this what I call a social brain, okay, a collective brain. And so we're gonna just present briefly what we do so that everybody knows everybody else. And then I'm gonna ask you some questions, okay? And so we kind of get into the subject deeper and deeper. And then we can take a short break and go into the brainstorming phase. It's a sort of a guided brainstorming with some questions. And together we can explore this field of material peer production with a focus on agencies, intentionality, and how we can sort of tweak economic models. Okay, and tokenomics is one way to do it. Okay, but how can we tweak economic models? How can we create economic games that incentivize people to behave in a certain way, in a way that everybody pulls in the same direction, right? And to diminish the probability of wrongdoing, let's say, in a peer production activity. So this is like a big theme. Okay, it's capitalism has developed for hundreds of years and has its own methods to align people's energy forces into the same direction. Commons-based peer production, material peer production are pretty new. And it's a little bit all over the place. The norms, the rules are not written yet. Models are evolving. Different people are trying different, techniques. They're using different tools. Yeah. Okay, but we're gonna say more about that. So I don't know. Let me start from the bottom. Let me start with Lawrence because he already mentioned something, and so he could start more easily.
Okay. I guess I'd probably be in the applications and development and actually doing side. So I'm a electrical engineer, application systems engineering, entrepreneurial. I've got a company doing building open hardware currently in the IoT realm. And so we're currently trying to figure out how to basically do some of the things you're talking about right now.
Cool.
So like basically, how do you open source a hardware product and then still plan on making money off of it, or making it still sustainable? And I've got ideas on how to do that. But I think that part of this is both sharing my ideas and then also getting feedback and then learning from and then co-developing a ecosystem, because that's part of the idea too. It's not like I'm just doing this by myself. We're doing it together. And I think that's one of the special things that we're doing. Other backgrounds is I also volunteered for the Paul event, which is a public convention sponsored project, which is an open source ventilator, and came out of directly out of the COVID project that you're working on, or that gestated it.
Okay.
I could talk more, but that's.
Yeah, so you have an experience with traditional models for open source hardware, but you also have done some activities in the more distributed or decentralized hardware production with the ventilator.
So I fit in a very weird niche where I do both. I cross both sections of the traditional manufacturing scene. Where I got 10 years of experience building PCBs and circuit boards and dealing with customers directly in a traditional framework. But I also have a strong background in open hardware and makerspaces, community development, and all that.
Yeah, so we're situating the levels now because there's people that are working at very concrete, low level, like within a makerspace, doing hardware design, prototyping. And there are people like IoPA, which are more at a higher level of abstraction, okay, like ecosystemic models and standards and stuff like that. Okay, cool. So Brent, let's go with you. Let's go in order.
Oh yeah. I guess I'll just say it. I actually met Lawrence probably the fall of 2011. We had similar paths in that we met at the same hackerspace in Oklahoma City, doing own space. Definitely, I think geared towards the computer side of things at that point. That I spent a lot of time with the 2600 group. Their hackers or DEFCON DC405. Because I wanted to use their servers, their Linux servers, to spit up some sort of well, it was a centralized. I was thinking about decentralized and knowledge management and stuff like that. So I think probably in the past like decade or so, a little bit more, I've been thinking a lot about software architecture, metadata and semantically rich data, and kind of how a distributed system would work together to enable some sort of pure production or distributed manufacturing thing. But in terms of kind of actually to get that to happen, I think that's something that's been a little bit of a challenge for me. It's partly like, I don't know, maybe for me, like a communication thing. How do you take all these complex ideas, software things, and it's like, okay, yeah, this gears that make it happen, but how do you actually get it to be used and get it built out and get a kind of a critical mass? I think we're a lot further along than we were then. So that's kind of my background. But I'm also let me see. So I got an engineering degree. So I chemical engineering. So I do think on that wavelength, but I'm also beginning into doing a lot of hardware. I first started out with rockets and other things. And, got an ham radio, and I'm starting to tinker with my own kind of hardware and try to tie that in with distributed systems right now. Yeah. Okay. I think that's about it. Maybe.
Okay, Matthew.
Hello, I've been doing community currencies since 2008, and I've built and maintained a Drupal module and Drupal distribution, which is in use by 300 local exchange trading systems, mostly in Francophone countries. But that's not really why I'm here. In the course of doing all that work, I got very into monetary theory, and in 2016 published a white paper called the Credit Commons Protocol. And that's taken a very long time to be seen and to take hold. But there are now a few people working on it, and I've built a reference implementation. And what that means is that anyone who wants to do mutual credit accounting can now do it using the reference implementation, but also connect to anybody else who's doing it using the protocol. So it's a sort of local, regional, global, as many layers as you like, accounting system. I don't believe anything like that exists anywhere else, but also not a lot of people appreciate mutual credit as the initiated few do. It does have quite a specific set of use cases, and the person who's actually doing most of the business development for the Credit Commons is called Dill Green for Mutual Credit Services. So I'm just sitting in the background working on the reference implementation and highfalutin ideas, and even doing a bit of teaching nowadays. But Dill is actually building a business and has got some real mutual credit clients with communities and use cases behind them, and building apps and things. I found the case study that was sent in the email before very far from my area of expertise, and it made me wonder why I was invited here. Hopefully that will become more apparent. You think so, Tibby?
Yes, for sure, for sure. Well, just a short answer. We're talking about economic models that better align agencies, and currencies is part of that, because once you want to implement an economic game, you can use smart contracts, tokenomics, and all that. You can use methodologies like Sensorica has used, but currencies are part of that. Okay, yeah,
maybe an introduction to mutual credit, really just 2 minutes, would be appropriate at some point. It's not your normal tokenomics.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. So as you will see, probably Ricky will talk about a bit about tokenomics. So it's nice to have these different worldviews or point of views, right? So let's see how they complement or clash, which is both good. Lynn?
Hi, I am Lynn Foster, and my primary work right now is with a standards project called Value Flows, which covers all kinds of economic activity, including production and including exchange and including mutual credit. Right, Matthew? Yeah, we've touched over the years on this stuff. My partner, Bob Haugen, and I wrote Sensorica's initial NRP network resource planning software that is still vaguely in use, although it's practically crumbled into the dust because the code is so old and the library dependencies are so rotten anyway. But that was one of the inputs to Value Flows, which is it's a clean, relatively simple model based on an ontology developed in academia called REA, for Resources, Events, and Agents. So that's, right now we're kind of cleaning that up, trying to get it to a 1.0 release, and also working with a set of projects that are implementing it so that we're getting that experience back into the standard. And there's a few of those revolve around Holochain. There's a backend built called HREA for Holochain REA that can be used to put UIs on. And I think Tibby's been focusing that direction a little bit, but we shall see. Value Flows aims to be technology agnostic. It's a data standard. Let's see, what else? Anything else interesting or useful, Tibby, or is that good?
Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to mention this because now there's a picture that's starting to emerge. Having worked with the tools that Lynn and Bob have built, you realize that building economic models, there is something to do with currencies, but currencies is not everything. Far from it. So we have learned how to incentivize and align agencies over the time using all sorts of incentives. And what Value Flows and NRP does is that all the resources that you have within a network, money is part of that, but there is so many other resources that you have, and that can flow throughout the network. Well, they all are part of this, economic game that you're setting up. So it's, just wanted to put that on the table, and start not to go the slippery slope in thinking that money is necessary for an economic activity. Okay, it's really far from it. So we will talk about tokens. We will talk about mutual currencies, or mutual credit. But also, have to understand that we have experience in the past where only 10% of the resources that were used and went into a project was financial, and the rest were just gathered from people in different forms. Okay.
Yeah, but value flows is very currency agnostic, and money is optional, and
Exactly.
any kind of money is fine, or credits or tokens or whatever, or not. Right.
Yes. So that's good, because then the discussion is like, okay, money is a tool in the box. Okay, if you want to set in motion some economic activity, but it's not the only one, and it may not even be necessary in some cases, right?
Right.
Okay, Jeff.
Yes, good. Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. I've been actually looking forward to be in this kind of conversation. I'm working, by the way, on another project also called Value Flows, and the last few months have been trying to collaborate with the Seeds community and the HIFA platforms and local scale, to try to put together some kind of campaign to scale through developing or activating bioregions, and bringing every platform to provide the services to the ecosystems, and building actually a network of ecosystems. And this is where I see the kind of project that I see what you're doing, TV, here, very appropriate to scale the material peer production process through different bioregions. So as a background, for 25 years, I've been working on expanding Ken Wilber's integral approach to consciousness, and that's mostly what I have been doing and dedicated. Prior to that, I'm an internet entrepreneur with having set 7 different ventures. But the ultimate outcome of this effort to expand Ken Wilber's is that I have been I've conceived a new theory of value that has helped me produce a new cognitive tool, a new existential framework, a new value correlating method that ultimately will enable us, humanity, to evolve the way we organize the development and capitalize the value of our what I call our inherent goodness potential. And that I'm applying to create incentives to people to begin to participate and totally eliminate the need to compete, because the principle that no one can realize your potential. So the system that I see that we can build is a system that delivers an inclusive role for everyone to capitalize their unique potential, to contribute their unique potential. And this is the vision that I see that is possible to emerge within the community of Seeds and the platforms of HIFA, local scale, and value flows. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks. Just a little intervention here to try to glue everybody together. You mentioned value. We had a long discussion about your views on value. I also presented you our working definition of value. So for us, value is what moves people into action. Period. It's a subjective experience. That's what we operate in. And why I think this is so relevant, it's because when we're saying how do you put economic gains in place so that you align people's agencies so that they all pull in the same direction, and not have too many people pulling orthogonally, okay, which doesn't allow you to go forward to your goal. Well, value is part of that equation, and because this is what moves people into action, and it's not money, okay? It's not money. It's a pure subjective experience, and money could be we call that a valuable, okay? It could be you can put an ice cream cone in front of a kid and he's gonna run for it. Well, he's gonna deploy some energy to go and get it. For him, he has a value experience, that kid, when he does that. You can put a pile of money in front of people and they're gonna start running towards it, or do something for it, do work for it. So money is valuable, but it's not value. I think it's, just to tie everybody together, when we talk about currencies, they're valuable, okay? They're not value per se, but they're valuable. And with Lean, there's other valuables. There's plenty of other valuables that we can account for, and we can build infrastructure so that they start flowing. They can be shared, and not just sitting in somebody's vault, basement, or yeah. So value, it's a nice concept to tie stuff together here. Okay, so MySim is part of the facilitation group. Maybe we can present ourselves too at some point, but let's give priority to those that are not part of the team. So I guess the next one is Ricky, right? I never know how to pronounce your name. Ricky?
You could just say Rye, make it easy.
Okay, right.
Wow, what a beautiful group of humans. Nice to meet you all. Some of you again. And what I think a lovely conversation so far, where we're trying to attach currency and money and these concepts of a particular type of game to what really actually matters, what's actually valuable, and how do we define that? And I think that's really beautiful. So we can go down a million rabbit holes. I'm sure we could probably enjoy countless hours of that, but I'm going to try to fast forward to a relevant part of what I'm up to today. And that's, capitalism, I think, went into hyperdrive when it created these things called incubators, and universities taught how to play the game of capitalism. So universities were set up to bring in new players of this new game, and then incubators were set to fund and resource people to play the game of capitalism and go set up companies and compete in markets, etc. So if we're conceiving of this post-capitalistic world, like, what are the incubators and the alliances of organizations needed to actually help groups of people, walk across that bridge from the current games they're playing into new games? And I like to call them games to simplify, economic and socio-political systems, all this stuff. I just like to box up and say it's a game, and maybe we can play new games. Monopoly is over. So that's probably the most relevant thing that I'm spending my time on, is that incubator. So last year we went through a process with 13 land projects. So physical communities that own land. So one was 4,000 acres in Nicaragua. It was a 5-star resort wanting to turn it into an eco village by the beach concept with 1,000 families. Or it was a 1-acre farm in the middle of a city trying to set up a community farm and an economy around a local food system there. So these could be different games in the real world that people need help with all these awesome tools that we've been building and ideas and processes. Great, like, people are already inspired to play new games, families that are wanting to raise their kids in a new way, bunch of intentional communities and eco villages and people wanting to live life in a different way are really motivated intrinsically, which is where I think the core, when we talk about using rewards and intrinsic motivations and stuff, I think, the intrinsic motivators are more important than the extrinsic ones that I think the games try to design too often. So that's really where I'm at. If I could try to summarize, is trying to align with those intrinsic motivations of people wanting to create new realities and being like, great, we've built all these tools. Here's the actual incubator and organizations that can help you use those tools and set up land-based projects across the globe and just start playing the games rather than continuing to design them. So anyway, that's kind of my big motivation, because I spent most of my time designing games and less time playing them.
Okay. Yeah. So good, we're on time. We have half an hour. On the screen, you have a diagram. Okay, and this is something that we arrived at after the first workshop, doing the synthesis, and I thought it's good to plug it in here, so that we can inform a little bit. Now you can look at it on the right side, and think about yourself as kind of where you are in this ecosystem, right? These are some concepts here. The round. On the right side of the image, the round, the circles, okay, you have model drivers, leadership, organizational frameworks. I see Rai working on that. I see him as an architect, right? So he's a model driver. Some people are more like working with resources. They're very close to resources. We don't have a user per se here in the group, okay? Somebody that's on the receiving end, let's say, of a peer production process. But we can also have people here that are in the support roles, you know, infrastructure development, like Brent and Lynn, you know, professionals that you know, concentrate on quality control, standards, policies, regulations, and all that. You can have people doing dissemination roles within the ecosystem, okay, communicating stuff, even logistics, and contributors. You know, I see Lawrence a lot sometimes in this role of contributor, you know, designing hardware, designing hardware for a project. So I guess you know, you can just look at this and you don't have to mention it, but kind of understand where you fit in this ecosystem, at what level you operate. We can also say, are you in the weeds, in the details, or you're more like high up in the abstraction, doing some work with policies, regulations, model design, or you're tightening the nut in a workshop somewhere. Also, what are you programming for? Is it like a platform? You know, we heard currencies, mutual credit, value flows. You know, that's pretty high up there in the abstraction. Brent also is a software developer working with metadata, so he's also pretty high level. So just for you to know where you are, that's important. And then we're gonna go for a quicker round just to see who's in the room here as facilitators. So you can also know like how we're guiding this, like what kind of people are facilitating this process. So maybe we go with I don't know, start with Stefan, because he has his hand up. Maybe he has another question.
Yeah, hello, welcome. This is very, very nice to see everyone here. And I suppose one thing I was going to add in here is in this exploration, I work a lot with something called infusion space, which looks at different ways of having a flexible space for exploration. So you can get different types of fields of practice to explore. And one of the things we're doing on that journey to exploring something very flexible was to start from somewhere and find a way in during the workshop to that kind of flexible space. And actually, so the starting point that sort of this came from was kind of this position of quality management in, which is one way in. So there can be many ways in. And at the moment, it's quite hard to integrate different ways in, and we end up having to default to this kind of economic model for larger scale coordination. So in this case here, what was the way in for this group in the middle, this circle of people trying to do contracts, trying to understand how to understand their environment of solutions and problems. And that was the way in which was happening in this instance. And therefore, it's not necessarily the way in that would happen for other people in other sectors. So I was thinking one thing, Tibby, could be the sense of like grounding people in the sense of where this one was coming from, because this was a journey from the more abstract to get some sense of where people are related, who are doing some sort of regulatory overview, as is what you do, and then that could or will be going maybe a bit more embodied and a bit more grounded if it was to carry on further. But in this case, maybe just place yourself in there so they can relate to how this is your kind of ecosystem or your regime of intention in the middle there.
Yeah, we're gonna go back to
comes
we're gonna go back to this diagram, and maybe we can place people on top of it for sure. Yes. Yeah, we're gonna go back to that. Okay. So let's start from there. Who's that? Maisam?
Yeah, sure. Hey
Yeah,
guys,
quickly.
I'll introduce myself in the context of the slide we have. So Sensorica, as you all know, is a innovative type of organization, and it requires contributors, and I'm one of the contributors. And I contribute in dissemination. I've contacted most of you, and I also contribute in designing the methodology, which we are sharing with you now. Initially, I'm an ethical economist. I'm interested in economic models and their effects on individual and social behavior. And as to be explained at the beginning, studying human agency within materials peer-to-peer is a very big need. And yeah, looking forward to analyzing this workshop. One last thing I would say, wearing two hats in this meeting. The one hat is kind of an organizer, like Tibi said, and the other hat is I'm Lebanese. We're currently working on what we call the fourth sector, which is the peer-to-peer decentralized economy. And it's a new type of economic organization within Lebanon, and I'm looking forward to giving my input about that as a project creator and listening to your feedback.
Tim, can you quickly summarize your input here and maybe some of your passions?
Is that me? And can you hear me okay? Because I'm on a weird mic setup.
Yeah, your voice is like a radio quality.
Oh, okay. I guess okay. Yeah, I guess I've been seeking to contribute what I can in the context of Open Value Networks and Sensorica participation as an affiliate since about 2018, I think, something like that. And I guess to caption it based on the resources of the conversation so far, I mean, my motivations are almost identically aligned with both Jeff and Reiki. So everything that they said about kind of why is my why. But and my background is a lot like Lawrence's. So that's where I'm coming from, I guess. And so I'm just, I guess, supporting and helping where I can in this process. So that's
yeah. So Tim is very good in doing synthesis and kind of summarizing app discussions into a very nice ball of ideas. So yeah, let's hope we can benefit from his presence. Vinny?
Hey guys, pleasure to get to know who I don't know yet here. And it's a real pleasure to see so nice grids of people coming from different places and different experiences to do the second workshop, right? Well, to quickly introduce myself, I'm related to the peer-to-peer commons world since my existence on this planet. So I literally am from, as TV says, I'm from the planet peer-to-peer, so I live on it. And I actually have been exploring the synergies between the peer-to-peer paradigm and the emergency of complexities, because we are complex beings. We don't really notate how complex we are. We usually use systematic frameworks to deal with reality and life itself. And I've been doing all sorts of explorations, trying to synergize the peer-to-peer paradigm with the emergence of complexity and with the global perspective. The global perspective is when you mesh the hyperlocal with the bioregional and the planetary at the same time. It's not the same as the Cosmo local production as Peer-to-Peer Foundation Bowen talks about. It's different. It's a different approach. It's a more cultural approach. So I'm here to just to share this type of exploration vision within this very, very relevant work that TB and Mason and everybody is actually doing. So yeah.
Yeah, so we have a newcomer, Gatson. Could you say a few words about yourself, just for people in the room to know how you could contribute?
Thank you very much. Hi everyone, it's great to be here. This is my first time in this sort of forum. That's basically because I'm currently on a project make concerning maker spaces and yes, basically the whole idea of open technology, open sharing, and I'm very open, for lack of a better word, to understand and really see how best I can also contribute to this conversation.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Yeah, are you involved with the Make project? Like you oversee this kind of network of maker spaces throughout Africa, or you're embedded in some specific maker space? At what
So I'm
level do you
actually
operate?
Well, more on the macro level at the moment
Macro,
because we're
okay.
working with
Interesting. Okay, yeah, thank you for coming because you're kind of
Thank you.
completing the picture here. Okay, so
Thanks.
now we have an idea about who's in the room. The way we decided to approach this, because we're doing it for and with IoPA, right? IoPA, so they're designing standards, and they're looking at the entire material peer production field, and they get feedback from the actors on the ground and trying to understand what doesn't work. Okay, so obviously we are in this problem solution mind frame. Okay, so that's why we use this. That's why this is how we frame these discussions. Okay, as this duality or how do you frame it, Stefan? Dialectic, as this dialectic problem solution, right? And this is what we're going to try to do, and recognizing that within this sphere, within this ecosystem, you have people that are actually doing stuff at different levels. Can be the guy in the makerspace designing a hardware device. Could be somebody programming a platform, and then there are enablers or developers that are more like higher level. It's not where the rubber meets the road. Is that they're putting in place the tools for the doers to do their job, and so let's think about this as a problem solution, and distinguish between a doer who will be our sensor. He is our sensor. He's the one that really experiences something and perceives some experiences as problems. Okay, that thing didn't quite work well. That thing didn't flow. I was not able to do as much as I could. Okay, so the doer will express problem. They're the sensors. They're out there. They're doing something, and in their experience, stuff doesn't work. Okay, and the developer comes on top and feeds from that experience and from that expression of a problem, and tries to enable, tries to develop, I don't know, rules, governance, tools, games, to allow the doer to do his job properly. So there should be this collaboration. And unfortunately, from my experience, sometimes developers work in too much isolation. Sometimes they think they know what's needed in the world, but they actually don't. Some of them, they have this genius spark, and yes, they get it, and they come up with this magical tool. But 99% of the time, unfortunately, that's not what happens. And we develop a bunch of stuff that doesn't go anywhere because the doer looks at it and says, well, it doesn't solve my problems. So I want us to be able to bridge, okay, and have the doers. I consider myself a doer. Maisen is a doer. Maisen is a doer in Lebanon. He senses the friction between, local actors, people in the village, politicians, right? So he has, everything happens at the skin level. And in the end, it's about how do you organize processes for doers, and how do we build infrastructures as a response to these kind of problem statements or problem expressions. So Maisen, if you're there, we're gonna move a little bit through the slide just to build some more shared understanding. Maybe we can.
Yeah. So this is a process: preparation, co-creation. We talked about that. These are the facilitators. We introduced ourselves. Desired outcomes.
Yeah, maybe we can speak a little bit about.
Yeah. So as Tib is explaining, we're aiming to explore technical possibilities to better align agencies in materials peer production, and we're doing it in this workshop from the economic perspective. So the aim is to develop inter-organizational capacity, and Tibi has been laying out. So yeah, this is the scope.
Just to stop a little bit there, developing inter-organizational capacity. I think it's very easy to jump over that. What we're trying to do with IoPA is, like Stefan put it one day, was to configure agents in the ecosystem. It's not to build new organizations. And Vinny also speaks about complexity doing and not doing stuff in the organizational way, where you kind of project a structure and put everybody into place as a cogwheel in a motor. It's the way we see peer production evolving is like every agent is independent, and we have to configure them so that they can come together for a moment to do something together, and then they can disassemble and reassemble in other ways very organically. So they have to be configured to be able to do that kind of assembling and disassembling. And if you think about it, that's building inter-organizational capacity, because some of these agents are not just individuals. Could be a makerspace somewhere, could be an open source community, could be Haifa, could be Seeds, could be Drupal, the Drupal community, and all that. So or Holo REA or Holochain. So developing inter-organizational capacity means having these tools and methods and procedures so that we and culture, so that we don't see ourselves as just part of an organization, but we see ourselves as part of these large ecosystems, and act to kind of build bridges and work more in between organizations than within organizations. Okay, inter-organizational capacity development is what we have explored with Vinny between Sensorica and DAO, some and other networks and organizations. How do you build these tools, these bridges, so that people develop this, not this tribal identity, but get out of the tribal identity, and we put in place mechanisms so that these organizations actually do exchange a lot of stuff in an almost automated way. So I think that's very important. So we are here representing different organizations. We carry our identities within these organizations, and one of the outcomes that we'd like to see after this kind of discussions is to say, oh yeah, okay, so how do we create these more permanent interfaces, so stuff can happen more in between organizations, right? interorganizational capacity. And that's what IoPA is trying to do, because peer production is not about one organization. It's about, it's like crypto, it's the technology is relevant in between organizations, not within an organization. That's why, and everything about peer production, the tools that we develop have to be relevant in between organizations, not just within an organization. Okay, you can move forward.
Yeah, before we move on, does anyone would like to share any idea or thoughts regarding what we just shared?
Yeah, I just want to add something quickly, based on TV, is that in the Taudao experience, one of the dynamics that we highlight a lot is the open learnership, the constant open learnership spaces that happens between the peers. Like, you're always sharing your time, all sorts of resources, but you're learning with each other. So it's embedded in Taudao's dynamics. So, and we call it, that sense, it's extremely flexible and adaptable, and people are always interested to invest themselves in the process itself. So I just want to add that, just that what she just said. Thanks.
Okay, so Meissen, you can, I think we can jump, because people know about IoPA a little bit. I'm
just waiting to see if anyone wants to mention anything else. Okay, as you saw on the previous slide, we broke down to, sorry, today is the economic workshop. So, TV?
Yeah, just go to slide 11, and we go down from, we're going to go from 11 to 17, and because now the whole idea now is to have this free talk. Okay, so go to 11 again, and okay, so now we know who's in the room. What we're going to do now, we're going to have like share some experience of peer production. So we're going to put ourselves in peer production, okay, in the process of peer production. Could be material, could be digital, because some of you are involved in the digital peer production, and see ourselves in that context as an actor, and try to formulate or express some problem that you think is relevant to bring on the table. I could start, okay, just to provide an example. And as we do that, we can use, go to slide 13, we can use some of these artifacts as a visual support for what we say. So you could say, this is the problem, and then we decide where to map it or where to take some notes. So Meissen, can you jump to slide 13? Okay, so we can either put it here or on slide 14. We already saw this slide. We go to slide 14. Slide 14, which shows a bit the mechanics of of a peer production action. Okay, and we call this decentralized production. Okay, so you could be speaking from the level of a makerspace or as a user, speaking about a problem that you experienced. Or maybe you are you are developing a platform for designs, like a wiki or whatever, or you're or you may be part of an NGO, maybe part of a traditional organization that facilitates a peer production action. For example, suppose that there is a disaster. There's a nuclear disaster in. And this is a real story, right? There's a nuclear reaction in disaster in Japan. Okay, there's a leaky reactor. So what do people do? They get together and they design these radiation sensors, and that allow the population to engage in citizen sensing. Okay, but maybe there is an NGO there during this disaster and say, okay, we're going to coordinate these efforts. So we get the money from the UN and choose some good designs, reliable, open source designs for radiation detectors, and then call a bunch of makerspaces on the ground and ask them to fabricate them and to teach people how to use them, and then to put the data on a database. That's an example of distributed or rather decentralized peer production. Why is it decentralized? Because you have the NGO in the middle as a main facilitator and coordinator, and they just use this peer production platform that already exists, all these makerspaces and their capabilities, to produce the stuff and talk to the users. And if you go to the next slide, you can take the NGO out and you can replace it by, I don't know, by some peer-to-peer coordination mechanisms. You can have a DAO in the middle, and you can have a situation that it's just spontaneously springs into existence using these Web3 tools and incentives that we can associate with them. So that's an example of a distributed peer production. So we're going to use these visual diagrams for your problem expression and see what we can. So we're going to map as we go, right? So you can go off the presentation mode, Myson, and we're just gonna jump to the one that is relevant when somebody is speaking, right? 13, 14, or 15.
Okay, so Lawrence, you want to go ahead?
If you
Yes,
if you need an example, I can give you an example. If you think you already know, yeah, Lawrence, you can go. Perfect. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm going to get you. So okay, so here's a great example, because I think this highlights the problem with this current paradigm that you have. What happens 5 years later? The NGO has gone off into other things. The local makerspace has all moved on. And you have a user who's pulling from documentation that's 5 years out of date and wants to reproduce the item that this entire effort put in place, because for whatever reason they need it again. So a great example would be, let's say you have another COVID emergency and you want to rebuild on the work that was done during COVID-19 for the next pandemic. What happens when you're pulling together all these threads that are all left in repos and bins and other places? You need to restart that machinery again. As a user, because the users are going to be the ones who have the first need, because those are the people who actually want it. You need to have, what's going to be the mechanism to re-engage this machinery? Do you have to go all the way through the NGO to the DAO to these other pieces? Or if you do have a DAO, how do you basically hibernate the DAO and then rebuild it up when you have users who want to basically invest in that DAO to basically restart the machinery to get the product put together? I've got ideas, but I want to hear from everybody else.
Yeah. So what I sense there is just to make it clear, I sense a problem with continuity, right, or persistency. Is that okay? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just want to capture.
There is the NGO or DAO or the documentation platform repository are in theory the places where those continuity and consistencies live, but as you know, everything requires maintenance to see it survive and see it maintain. Nothing stays static.
Yes.
So these are the things. We can think of it like the organization that you have to feed to keep it alive, to keep it functioning, to keep it relevant.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm having a picture in my head as I'm listening to you, Lawrence. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, electricity cut off in Lebanon. Sorry. Yeah. So I was having this picture in my head, is as if I'm a new user and I'm going to that trash yard of broken cars and broken pieces, and I'm trying to look all over the yard to a few pieces here and there to try to mash them up and get them to work again.
Yeah, exactly. And where does that information live? So let's say you had an open source car. You'd have let's say, and that would probably be your best case, or you have a community of car owners who, like in Cuba or other places where you have a lot of legacy cars and a lot of built-in knowledge in the communities about the vehicles that you have available. If you had, I think a couple different. I think we've got a lot of ideas for how to basically create these repositories for information. And I think that a DAO is also a really good concept for how to basically create these basically a collection of organizational knowledge, institutional knowledge, and like agreements and standards for these particular projects. But just to cut to the chase, what I've been working on and what I've been thinking about is the idea of taking something that's, I guess it's very uniquely Western, the idea of a warranty, which is a organizational body that puts together a series of agreements, and this also ties into DAO as well, but a series of agreements that that can be maintained in an escrow or pool of money that can be pulled from to feed those to feed the support and stated statements in that that warranty. And the reason why it's important is because it also brings up the concept of how do you basically re-energize an existing DAO or existing warranty or an existing platform repository. You can actually, the users themselves can put money into, or resources or time into these repositories to basically give them new life, to basically put money into, or resources or time into these repositories, these DAOs, these organizational contracts that can then do things like pull in developers to put more time into it, or call on local makerspaces, or not only makers. I think makerspaces is an overused term, but basically local producers or manufacturers that can do the things that they want done. And it can be like and I think it can be encapsulated into like almost like a corporation that has its own identity, or its own a single purpose application identity. And it can almost be like in the real estate realm, they're almost like a homeowners association or a collective for a co-op for a piece of land and property, or a condo where you have a condo association that you basically buy into, you use the resources of, and you find value in the use of it. So anyways, that's my pitch for how to solve that particular problem.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add real quick also, Lawrence mentioned maybe an intersectionality between a user and a doer, in a sense that when a user is missing something, he is the one that comes up with the idea and tries to develop it and becomes a doer. Did I correctly capture that? And maybe we shouldn't always initially separate user and doer, but maybe at some point at the beginning they were one and then they separate.
I think you can. I think every one of them can be combined. The producer could also be the user. I think there's a lot of intersectionality, but I think that the main part is that the user influences, and then maybe that's the second slide, because I wasn't sure what the red arrows mean on the next slide.
Yeah,
I believe that there's a lot of, I think the main complaint is that the Bitcoin money symbol needs to also come from the users as well. And the way that money gets transported back into the ecosystem needs to also be expressed.
Vinny, I think your mic is making noise again. You know, the usual noise that it makes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yes.
I think that in that case, Claudius, what we can factor in is this learnership dynamics, you know, open peer-to-peer learnership dynamics. If the user feels capable of to become a doer, or wants to be capable to become a doer, if we have this as a fundamental in the IoPA dynamics, he will have places to learn about it, right? So just to see how the peer-to-peer learning dynamics is really relevant in this type of scenario that we're discussing here, just to add that.
Mm-hmm. So I do see an economic dimension here. Okay, so how do you incentivize or motivate these ecosystem services that will maintain, preserve, add permanency to things, right? And these things could be assets, digital assets like a design, okay? But there could also be processes. Okay. I don't know if we want to add more about that, or we want to.
Stefan wants to add something.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering about the idea of the network of networks, of maker spaces or others, so that because you've then got this sense of, I mean, this is that sense of how to get a sense of alignment at these different scales, because otherwise you kind of end up with everything being pushed down to the micro scale, or there being this one macro entity which basically just can't cognitively cope with the complexity and diversity of different scenarios. So yeah, I'd be interested to think about that.
But also, yeah, maybe we can take it a little bit more concrete. So, Lawrence, do you have a like when you spoke about this problem? Do you have a particular example, a story to share, or this is something that you conceptually see? Is this something that you had an experience with? How did it manifest itself at one point, if it did, or this is just an expression of a conceptual kind of thinking process that you had?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So a good example that happens all the time is that you want to basically use a open source project that maybe it was from 2012 or 2014, and you go in to look at the documentation, and all the documentation references are not there. Or they did a group buy at like 2015, but you can't get it anymore because the documentation is fragmented. Or one group turned around and decided to make it, and then they stopped selling it maybe 4 years later. And you want to go in and you want to pick one up. This is also directly tied to, and so that experience and that kind of thinking about those experiences also kind of brought me back around to how, as a manufacturer myself, how I would want to support my product long term, and how I could see, and how would I want to, how could I see building a infrastructure in a community that could basically grow with the community? Because the thing is, though, that like these projects don't really matter unless it's the impact that they have on the end users and the people that the impact that really matters. So the idea would be to, and it's kind of the question of like, when does a project need to be put to bed? And the answer is that is when the last person turns off the lights, when the last person who cares about the project leaves. And so with that in mind, the idea is that how do you then reinvigorate a project and create continuity? And the answer to that is you invite people in to work on the project. And so all these kind of like little thoughts kind of percolated around and then generated this idea of a warranty. And because like warranties are usually used in sometimes they feel exploitive, but the core of a warranty and the reason why they're attractive ideas in the first place is because it's a way of creating uncertainty in an uncertain world. And I believe that's at the core of it, a large part of economics and economic attractiveness for monetary policy and everything else is that it creates certainty in an uncertain ecosystem. So I think that I think it's an analogy that might work really well in this particular application in creating a framework for how do you basically invite people in to support this venture. That's kind of this nebulous concept of it's an idea, it's got some documentation, it may have a hardware component, it may have a personal component, it may have a social component, but that's where the DAO concept kind of comes in, because it's kind of like a DAO is primarily a decentralized set of agreements organized in a digital framework. And a DAO basically is just a representation of traditional corporate structure, manifested as code and as self-actuating decisions, and then using some of these tools to basically create where you'd almost have to have a manager to fulfill a lot of these organizational aspects. You can use digital tools to basically facilitate and distribute some of the cognitive load of maintaining these structures. And the nice thing about DAOs and the nice thing about repositories and other things like this is that the information, knowledge, and artifacts created can live with the project, and they don't die in the same way, or they don't decay in the same way as people's memories do, as people getting pulled away from projects do. The automation aspect, I believe, is kind of undersold, but it needs to probably be almost as, especially as we kind of we gently walk into this really weird world of like artificial general intelligence and what AI means and does. I think that parts of that can be incorporated into this for helping manage, organize, and keep a cohesive story or vision that can be reinvigorated when users need it. And I think that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, I'm gonna mark here also your hint to roll.
There's
AI.
there was a small chat between Lawrence and between Tim and Brent. So if you guys want to share.
We may have been addressing two different aspects of Lawrence's example. I was just kind of making an analogy or a metaphor with what I heard in the idea, and pointing to a other domain where there could be meaningful content related to that.
So we're gonna
Like,
have this.
I was just going to say, basically, what Lawrence was saying was when the project or the makerspace is quote unquote at rest, i.e., it's not active, so to speak. How to sustain the value that's there, or retain the capacities over time for folks who wish to reconstitute or reinvigorate, I think was the word maybe that was used, right? So animals, you and I, we all have a basal metabolic rate. It's what keeps us warm enough to be alive, even when we're doing absolutely nothing. And so that's kind of what that was about. That's
Interesting. Yeah, let's move around the room. You don't have to stick to the same subject, because that was just, one topic that was brought in for whatever reason. You can jump to some other expression of problems. Maybe you can also think about a problem, an expression of a problem from your experience that relates to agencies, which is that thing didn't work because some actor pushed for grabbing the scene or the spotlight, or was an opportunistic move. You see what I'm saying? Like a problem that has something to do with a decision not to go along with the flow. You see what I'm saying? Or to go to work for some other reasons or some other objectives, and potentially undermining, the collaborative work. Is there some experience that you had in the past based on that?
All the time.
Okay.
I don't want to talk all the time, but I mean, in my particular instance, I deal with a lot of customers on a regular basis. So what you end up having is that you have a misalignment of goals and preconceived notions. There's a lot of fear and anxiety driving these discussions and ideas. And what happened, and so you also have to realize that a lot of our social, economic, cultural artifacts are based on like very humanistic emotions and feelings that we've kind of hijacked and reutilized for these larger cultural expressions. So we think and we act in terms of fear and terms of needs and desires, but the cultural framework that we work in is what directs those fears, desires, and expressions. And they give us kind of framework and meaning towards what we feel and do.
Yeah, but that's very generic. It would be nice to have like an expression of a problem that was experienced, and also that relates to peer-to-peer. because we kind of know it's not that we know, but the idea is that there are patterns of problems between customers and companies. That's the traditional world. I wonder if there's there's an example in a case of peer production, okay, decentralized or distributed, where you have a dissociation between the designer and the producer. Maybe it's a do-it-yourself case where anybody can make it. You see.
Well, then the good example there is when you have a product that, or and so this happened when I was working with a collective of artists, and they were on the brink of actually making a profit for the first time ever, and all of a sudden, all the knives came out because there's a limited number of resources. There's a limited number of ability. There's nobody really knows like if it's going to be successful or not, but everybody's been putting in a ton of effort, and there's not a really good way of like figuring out who deserves what, who put in what, and so it became this really weird, interesting game of brinkmanship of who could basically present the best socio-economic and socio like inner social gamemanship to say that they deserve to be paid, and they deserve to be like put on payroll. And it's interesting because it only really ever transpired right at the really interesting brink between like a collective that's underpaid, under-resourced, and then a collective that has money coming in from a reliable source. And dealing with that transition between the two is a really interesting and hard to kind of emotionally grapple with scenario, because you basically have people that are underpaid.
Yes. So how would you capture that in like one single sentence, that the way we were trying to summarize here on the presentation?
So the easy one is that, so on the local makerspaces, not every local makerspace.
Yeah, I'm
just to use
like
this diagram as an example.
phrase.
Sorry, what?
I'm looking just for like one catchy phrase. How would you summarize, like, what is the type of the problem or the nature of the problem? Or is it about it's about what disparity of wealth, you said, right? And feeling.
Yeah, well, that's what feeds into it. But what it really comes into is resource allocation decisions. So in this diagram, you have three different local makerspaces, but you don't have any metric of like which local makerspace gets the initial Bitcoin, and you don't. I mean, and so that's where it comes in. It's like this.
Well, we don't know. I mean, that's a supposition because this thing. I mean, there's different arrangements, right? But let's say you say resource allocation decisions. And what hinders this proper resource allocation decision? What's the main point? Is it clarity and transparency about the value flows, or?
It's the lack of I guess foreknowledge in resource allocation, because you don't really know if your efforts are going to pay out. So
does it have something to do with a sense of fairness?
I think
maybe a sense of granularity. So different makerspaces are going to have different roles, and we're not able to quantify these different roles and whether they're able to do them or not. Hence, how much resources we should allocate.
Or they may not have experience with it. That you may ask them to do things that they can't do, and they'll tell you that they can do it, but in actuality, they can't. And sometimes
this is something we faced also in the tech workshop.
Okay.
So, Rai, you wanted to say something earlier?
Yeah, but it might take it onto a different path, though.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Oh man, that was such a lively conversation. My head's still just soaking it up. So Yeah, there's two things that I thought would be interesting to bring. And that's a cultural technology, because if we're talking about people playing new games and new tools and how we keep reverting back to what we were trained and used to and reverting to that mean, and then all the tension of that, like trying to shift stories and everything that comes from that, is the idea of a rite of passage. This is something that's been really, I've been focused on lately, and I thought I might get value in sharing with you all. And
Rite of passage.
the rite of passage, the main concept behind it is how you shift from one paradigm to another. So it's a cultural technology that was refined over thousands of years, maybe so much longer. Some cultures say so.
So do
and
you
it's
see you see that
technology.
as a solution, right? You see that as a
Not
solution.
as a tool in our tool belt, as we're designing DAOs and new games that we're playing with new currencies, etc. How do we invite people in?
Can you
So it's
start?
that membrane.
Can you start by saying if it? I think it's a great topic. Can you start by saying if it actually what type of problems that tool in the toolbox could solve? Can you like just briefly define the problem space that it's trying to address?
Yeah, it's to get a much higher degree of alignment before starting an initiative that might have a lot more buy-in and a lot more agreement of cultural agreements of what that means. So for example, you got those 3 makerspaces before they enter into this agreement with that DAO who's coordinating funds to this ecosystem of makerspaces. You know, what does it mean to actually join that ecosystem, to be part of that alliance, to actually be able to accept funds, right? So what is that process of actually saying, yep, you're part of this alliance or you're not part of this? What is that membrane that says you're out of this ecosystem or you're in it, right? So that's what I think is really interesting to consider, especially in our economic designs, is what is that, you know, rite of passage from being outside the ecosystem to in it, and in alignment and part of the game that's being played, right? Because I feel like that is a crux, because it's kind of like our bodies. We keep throwing this hodgepodge of cells together and wanting them to like self-organize, not realizing that, you know, maybe a lung cell doesn't want to be in the stomach. Maybe that's not the right environment for it. Maybe there should have been a better boundary to let that cell know, you know? So yeah, it's a different way of looking at this problem of how we get them started to begin with, if that makes sense.
Okay, so give us a more clarity on rite of passage, like one type of implementation. What do you think about? How do you think about that as a tool? Like how would you describe that tool?
Sure. So the tool is helping you change your paradigm and change your perspective. So the first phase of a rite of passage is, you know, breaking down your self-identity. That's why they're typically, when you look at cultures, they're always really challenging, really trialing. They're going to be very difficult, you know, push you to your edge and beyond a little bit, because then it breaks you down, and then your construction of reality kind of shatters, which is a necessary part of it in order to reconstruct your reality. You know, this might be a 3-minute video that's done so well that people come to join your ecosystem, they watch it and they're just like, okay, I see things with a new perspective. But anyway, the second phase of a rite of passage is liminality. It's the time between stories.
Yes,
where
okay.
a new story can take place and a new story can emerge. And I think this is a really powerful group process. So we're helping DAOs right now, which are land-based projects. So for example, let's say 150 families say they want to build a new economy. They've got all their designs for their economy, whatever. It's going to be on 1,000 acres of land, you know, and we're going to go and do this project together. We're going to pool our resources and play in this new economy, right? Okay, so then how do they actually go through a process of then moving to that land and stepping into this new game, using currencies or not, you know, whatever they're doing, right? So the liminality phase is that time in between stories where I feel like any group can come together and be like, hey, this is our unique story we're creating. And then the third phase is always the integration phase, where you take in those wisdoms and you create a new self and you step into a new story. So I think, you know, modeling that 3-stage process with how people might join our economies and might not, you know, rites of passage pride themselves on their failure rate, you know, not necessarily their acceptance rate. So maybe the more the protective the boundary needs to be, right?
It acts like a filter.
Absolutely. That's 100% what it's for. I mean, it could be, okay, you want to build reputation so you don't have bots in your Web3 ecosystem. Okay, so this rite of passage is going to definitely prove you're human because you got to do human things in the real world or whatever, you know? So it could be like a bot filter and all sorts of filters. You know, if you're a development DAO and you just want to have a bunch of coders, well, maybe your rite of passage is some really hard coding challenge that if you do it, then you're a good coder. Okay, you're in, you know? So the rite of passage could be something very simple like that, or something more elaborate, like, you know, our intentional community is wanting everyone to do a 2-week fast or whatever in the desert of our land before joining our project. Like it could be, you know, super extreme. So I think it's really interesting, you know, how they could be designed, but it's really understanding that concept that I think if we don't have that membrane and that boundary, we end up just throwing a hodgepodge of cells together. We keep getting cancer-like behaviors and we keep thinking what the heck's going wrong. But I think if we learn some lessons from organisms and how they coordinate in our tools, anyway, that's kind of how I'm coming from. I see some hands up, so I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah, I think Brent was the first one, right? Brent, do you want to go in the same direction or change, talk about something else?
I don't know. This might be complementary or just spawned from something earlier. Kind of in my experience, like so I wrote down 2 different things, like either you fit your identity to a credential or you express your identity as a credential. So those are really like 2 different things. So like for my personal experience, I did a particular degree, and I guess I knew early on there wasn't like a 1-to-1 match for it. I mean, there were elements of it, but it didn't really necessarily allow me to, I guess, interface and do the things I necessarily wanted. But and in terms of like, if you want to interface with the economy and get jobs and etc., you kind of have to act. You have to morph your identity to the credential. That's really kind of what credential can you afford as an entry point. So, but if you express your identity as a credential, well, that's realizing that all your connections, all your graphs, all your different things, even though they're not appreciated or by the gatekeepers, and that's kind of the old system, because like the universities are basically selling prestige. Like everybody said, oh, you went to X university, you must know a lot of this stuff. But really, if you looked at like a graph of like, oh, what all you've done and what all you know, you can see, aha, okay, well, he's done this and this and this and worked with these people, kind of like a social graph that you could look at all the projects and everything else. But yeah, it's just like, yeah, and then there's like, I think there's a point of a rite of passage, but you can also get into a thing with, I think, like universities. There's just like so many people at like that university. There's professors in each department, and like you get in a choke point where if those people control the funding and the grants, and they don't believe in something, then it prevents a whole people who are funneling through from really expressing themselves in different plethora of ways that were really possible, but you know, sort of thing. So I guess that gives it a peer paradigm where people are coordinating in different ways, and you don't have like the old model where you have an organization that does it. So the universities are, I'm rambling on, but sorry.
What I'm capturing here is credential-based access. The question of identity versus credentials. I didn't quite get your if there's a problem with like what is the type of problem with that. But I can relate to a lot of situations in an ecosystem of peer production where credentials are required to access processes. Even to walk into a makerspace and use a 3D printer, well, we have to demonstrate at least that you know how to safely use it for yourself and for the machine. So even accessing a lab space, okay, accessing a makerspace, you will not have a key the first day you show up, okay? So because you need trust, right? So there's a lot of credential problems related to access, and you know, if we want to make peer production more fluid, access is one of the things that we need to easily provide, so you can go from one city to another and boom, get access to a CNC machine because you don't have to demonstrate, but you can show that you can safely use it, right? But I don't see, is there a problem that or are you providing a solution to previously stated problems?
Yeah, I don't want to knock out Tim, but I guess like more granularity of kind of what a credential is, because I'm just thinking about my own personal experience, and it kind of boiled down to, with me entering the career field, of like really one person's opinion, but really like I learned a whole bunch of skills in college, but if that like one link what breaks, then I'm unable to do certain things. Like, but if I wanted to move to like from chemical to mechanical or something like that, then and I want to present that, then that would require me to go through a whole system again and kind of work around. And I guess that's something personal feeling I didn't do, but like, but I think like thinking in like different terms of fields and engineering really governs kind of what you can do and where you can go, because when you enter a company generally today, they want to have it easy. It was like, oh, you have an aerospace engineering background, you have a mechanical engineering, and they hire for that, and that's how you get in the system. But I guess with the peer-to-peer, it's like a little bit more loose.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's asking you if you have a diploma, if you want to contribute to an open source project. You just do it, and it's gonna be peer reviewed.
But that gets into like these fields of engineering or something are just like so broad, and they're all kind of separated and they're in their like own tribes. But really, the skills of saying, oh, I know how to operate a laser printer or a laser cutter or a 3D printer, or I know how to use a CNC mill, or like
well, that has material consequences, and you cannot just delete, copy, paste a 3D printer, right? So whatever has heavy material consequences, whatever is heavy, it's local, and whatever has material like costs for maintenance and use requires credentials. That's what I learned. You can go on a wiki page and just do some damage, whatever, it's going to be reverted back within a second. But you cannot revert back a broken 3D printer, but just by pushing a button, right? So you can, I don't need to know your credentials as an engineer to work on a project, because you're just going to mess with digital stuff that can be reverted. You see what I'm saying? So there is a distinction between the physical and the virtual.
Right.
I
agree. There's a physical thing, but I guess the other thing is like, I think credentials could be thought of it as a smaller thing, and they'd be like more composable. So you could be a kind of a type of engineer described by your graph that's not necessarily existing today, but it just models a body of skills, and then you can interface with other people. But anyways, I don't want to hog the ball.
Okay, well, it could be a space. It could be a space of solution. I would like to strategically move to Gatson now, because he's in Africa and in connection with makerspaces, and maybe we can get an expression of a problem there related to misalignment of agencies, and then we're gonna put in Lynn and Matthew, because they're about flows, right? Of either mutual credits or material resources or tangible and intangible resources. Yeah, I would like to give him a chance. Jeff also didn't speak, but I would put Jeff and Tim after the intervention of Gatson, and then after Lynn and Matthew, because knowing them, they have the ability to kind of synthesize, what was said, because they're more like theoretical in their approach, and they have these theoretical abilities. Is that okay if we go like that? Like go close to the ground to makerspaces in Africa, get some expressions of problems. Okay. and then see how Lean and Matthew can reply to that.
No, thanks. So we're actually just about kicking off the Make project, as you're aware. But one of the things that we've come across is really and has been rehashed already, which is the fact that open source hardware maker spaces are really different from the software bit. And the fact that whilst they tend to yield value in terms of the kind of sharing and the accessibility, there also are some real risks around capability of the various participants. And I mean, beyond this, what we're trying to do now is really to understand a lot more about not just the makerspace, but also the kind of participants that this would attract, particularly in Africa, to see how best to support both sides, right? And makerspaces have to have that assurance that this is something that I can invest in to support the business, and the businesses also need to understand how much is dependent on them to make this a sustainable model, especially as a financing vehicle, for let's say a purpose-based financing vehicle for these institutions. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have an example where the business models or the lack of capability of participants got in the way of a peer production activity? Is there something concrete that happened at some point where we can? I just want to have some grounding on that intervention.
Yeah, so this is actually speaking with owners of maker spaces. The feedback I shared is based on interacting with the owners of maker spaces. We're yet to really interact with the actual participants themselves. So I wouldn't be able to share specific examples at this point.
Okay, so what is the mismatch there? So let's talk about the business model. There's something about sustainability, and I heard funding in there. Okay, so there is you perceive a problem of ability to sustain this makerspace. You also use the word owner of a makerspace, which for me it raised a red flag. It's like, how can you be owner of a thing that is destined to be used by the community, unless you have like a sort of a private service oriented space where you kind of sell time and desk to users. Is that the business model that you're talking about?
No, so this is not necessarily that's not the expression actually. So there's more. I mean, this is open source hardware, and it's a space that is supposed to support the startups, and that is a cost cutting, let's say, opportunity for these businesses.
Okay, yes.
Access to resources at a scale that you typically wouldn't have access to. And the point of the ownership is really on the facilitation, not the fact that it's something that an individual or some organization decides to make money out of, but really to make. I like the use of the word incubator, as Tim has put there, but Tiberius. You've put there. There is that value that the individuals get, the participants get, which needs to be preserved to make it more sustainable over time. So that's what I was referring to.
That could be that could be relevant for Matthew, because he's working on mutual currencies. But can we clarify a little bit? So just so Matthew has something to grab on there and chew. and maybe lean, because yeah, so there's participants in these incubators, and the participants have some capabilities, and they can be part of the kind of the internal service that is provided, right? They can teach other people, they can answer to questions, they can help, right? They can facilitate work, right? They can orient, and then you kind of have a business model that sustains all that. So is the problem that sometimes the participants are not capable enough, or the quality or their training as service providers is not adequate, or they're not paid enough maybe to be there on a regular basis? Or
I think there's something to do with capacity, and the thing about best practice sharing to ensure that at least part of the learning curve is accelerated as much as possible, right? Without reinventing the wheel or making it more painful for any particular participant. So one of the things that has been, a subject of discussion, for instance, is what opportunities exist to build capacity of these individual participants. So then it's not just, to help them make the most of it, from the actual use of these assets and these maker spaces, and also for their businesses to enable them scale up, beyond, as it were, the capacity of the maker space.
Yes, that's interesting. So I'm going to put it into perspective before I let the others intervene, because we have plenty of discussions about this in the recent days. So you have projected at the screen the sort of a functional ecosystem of the functional side of the peer production ecosystem, where you have developers, repositories, a DAO in the middle there. You have some maker spaces and prosumers, right? Users and producers that can interface with the maker spaces and with the other things. So one of the problems in peer production, is how can I rely on a maker space? How can a maker space be reliable? Okay, we're having a disaster situation, and we want to dispatch to local makerspaces to produce reliably and teach, produce the sensors and teach the people, the local population. So I have a list of 10 makerspaces. Okay, how do I know how reliable are they? Should I treat all of them the same? So when you talk about internal capacity, best practices, so it's like we're opening that box, and we're looking at some metrics to say, well, this is a good place or a bad place. If I drop in $100,000 for them to produce something and learn and teach other people, maybe there's going to be misuse or money will be misallocated. So I go to Lawrence's problem as well, or maybe maybe they're too loose and they don't even have the skills to do anything with it, even if they have the willing to do it, right? So the makerspace is an actor, an organizational type actor that has its own inner dynamics and problems, right? Potential problems. And the quality of these actors, the quality of a makerspace, how are they organized? What kind of governance they use? How many smart people and knowledgeable people they have, and how they can maintain that pool of talent, let's say, okay, over time. Curate that pool of talent, let's say. So the question is that by increasing the quality of these actors in a network of peer production, you can actually increase the quality of the whole ecosystem, right? And by knowing how to evaluate some of these actors, you know how to address, how to coordinate. If you're the NGO, you know how to coordinate this ecosystem, because you know which one of these actors you can address, which one are trustable or not. Okay, so I don't know if Matthew or Lynn has something to do about this type of problems related to the inner functioning of these organizations.
Can I invite Lynn to go first?
Oh, I was going to do the same for you, Matthew,
Well,
but I can
ladies.
give it a shot. Sorry?
Yeah, go Lynn, yeah.
So a ton of things have been touched on, and we're at a really high level, and I admit that I'm having difficulty synthesizing and putting all this stuff together in terms of this conversation. But one thing I could talk about is just the concept of resource flows and recording those as they happen. Would go a long ways towards getting reliable data on things like what people talked about as credentials, like, well, what has this person actually done? And maybe what's been the feedback on what they've actually done? And, you know, how long have they been doing it and all that sort of thing. The discussion about contributions and how people get rewarded for contributions can also use resource flow data in that you can see if you can see the whole graph leading up to what you have, you can see who all contributed, and you can go back as far as you have data that links all of that together. So that includes any kind of, like when I use the term resource, I'm using it more broadly than maybe some of you have used in this conversation. It's more like anything that's useful, it includes all the currency, all the money things, all the token things, but it also more importantly includes work and skills and, you know, material resources and digital resources, and, you know, that might represent knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, like you can look back on resource flows and see contributions and kind of analyze that, maybe with software, I don't know. Also, I mean, the other thing in rewarding besides the actual contributions is what are the agreements up front? You know, what do people think is fair? And what have people decided is fair ahead of time? Or if you're coming into an existing network with an existing governance, what do they think is fair? And do you agree? So there's all of that piece of it.
Somewhat also related to rite of passage, right? When it comes to
and related, yeah.
I'm trying to draw loose lines that
Yeah.
don't mean, they're just hints to say, check if there is a connection there, right?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of where I'm at too. But then the other thing that comes to mind around resource flows is that if we want to actually talk about how do we put together software infrastructure that can make all this stuff work, and all these different kinds of organizations that will be interfacing in a peer-to-peer way, or even within a network that's interfacing in a peer-to-peer way with individuals, you know, all of that needs the glue, right? It needs standards and methods and ways people can access all these I want to use the term resource, and I apologize if that's twigging people in a wrong way in some way, but let's see, where was I going with that thought? Anyway, so they're like software could help, and IoPA does a bunch of this stuff, like with the designs and scraping the designs all into one place and trying to use a standard with that, for example. But yeah, let's see. Matthew, looks like you want to say something.
Well, I'm also struggling with this conversation a bit. I've picked out two things that I think I might be able to say something about. The first one is the question of how to compensate people for contributions, especially when the process begins long before there's any money. Money being a resource that always comes from outside. This happens a lot with DAOs and volunteering organizations. Also, mutual credit services been going for 3 years now with hardly any money coming in. And it's a very difficult problem because different people are contributing different types of things in different quantities. And also they have different needs for money. And if money is what is coming in, then the needs for money is what must be considered. So I don't think there's going to be any easy answers, and we shouldn't be looking for them. There is a way in which money solves these problems, but only really on a large scale and through a marketplace. Money helps us to evaluate different quantities of different types of things in terms of each other. So if you were starting a huge volunteering organization and loads of people were putting in hours and some people were putting in equipment and machinery and land and things, then you might be able to find on that scale a way to value the different types of contributions. But if it's just 5 people, there's no way at all. You end up having to make very arbitrary evaluation of contributions, usually using money to value them. So you would say something like, well, my time is worth X dollars an hour and your land contribution or your building that we're working in is worth X dollars a month. And therefore we know what proportion to distribute the limited money into. Of course, nobody gets that amount of money until the actual enterprise makes a profit, which is very often never. But at least you then have a sense of proportion. But it doesn't even take into account the needs when you do that. So I think it's important, highlighting a case that we heard about earlier, that when people go into these kinds of agreements, they arrange in advance what will happen if and when the money comes. And it's important for some of them to acknowledge that, well, for everybody to acknowledge that most of what they're doing is probably going to count at the end of the day as volunteering, and that some people will have more urgent needs for money than others. Now, I've never actually done that in any formal way. I can point to what Dill has done in mutual credit services. He said that the early hours given were the most speculative, and we would keep a count of hours, and the very earliest hours would be multiplied up. But then after that, you only get anything out that isn't wages when the organization turns a profit.
Yeah. And
before that, you can only get anything out. Sorry. You can only get anything out that isn't wages. Did I say that? When the organization turns a profit. And before that, you can only get wages out when the organization is actually funded. And of course, only for doing something that's needed at the time. And so that leaves a space for a bit of time banking in an organization like that, where it happens very often in time banking that people give without receiving. They don't enter into it to exchange. And other people, of course, receive without giving so much. They're also not entering into it for exchange. And it means when you're doing mutual credit accounting, that some people end up with very high balances in their hours account because they've earned hours, and some people with very high negative balances because they've been benefiting from other people's time. And that's okay. You don't have to balance it. It's just visible for all. But if you can get those kinds of agreements in place before you start, then expectations are managed and harmony can be sustained. The other thing I've noticed that we're talking about a lot is the reputation systems. how do you transfer your reputation, your skills and experience, your kudos from one system to another? And a lot of people want to make technical solutions for that in terms of protocols. And the most extreme one I've seen is the Hollow project Neighborhoods, which was premised on, when they did the initial crowdfund, it was all about transferable reputation systems. But that was such a bad idea that they've now dropped it, and they're pursuing a slightly different angle. I can't remember what it is, but it's not so bad. And the reason it's so bad is because reputation is always contextual, and contexts are very often small, or at least fractal. And so it's very hard to move a reputation from one system to another. And I would suggest going back to systems of personal recommendation, and not all the badges and points of all the different qualities and the levels and the gaming. Just get somebody who is known or who does have some qualifications, like official government recognized qualifications, to say what you're capable of and what your strengths and weaknesses are, you know, the old fashioned way. And that could be systematized a bit better and made more efficient. But I don't think all these fungible points approaches are ultimately very scalable, or at least they're very hard to get started across a wide field. So that's all my comments so far.
Yeah, we're running out of time. So because Vinny has to repurpose this Zoom for another meeting, but I want to give Jeff the mic, and let's capture something. Yeah.
We just got more time because the next meeting was rescheduled just by now. So feel free to continue.
Oh, you work in the background. Okay. Okay. Well, we said 2 hours. So yeah. Yeah, we can continue. If some of you wants to leave, that's fine. Is Jeff still around? I don't see him around.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, wrap it up. I mean,
Yes.
wrap it up for us, for if you can synthesize or even express a new problem or new type of solution.
No, enough problems here. But ultimately, I think that it's all at what Linz referred to as the glue that can make all this work. And ultimately, is that okay? So we have a new way of manufacturing material peer-to-peer production. But how do we actually make it work? How do we take advantage of the technologies that provide us with a new way of trusting each other, so that we can, you know, organize ourselves in a whole new way, and scale this, and all that is made possible by the technology. But I think that the crux of everything is to be able to have a way to fund the system until it becomes sustainable. In other words, until it generates, it becomes profitable enough to stand alone. And for that, I think ultimately we have to have a new way, this is again a cultural issue. We need to create a narrative that brings in and moves away from the value being money, right? From value being financial, and to be able to show, I think that we can show that what we're doing is enabling us to organize the development and capitalize the value of human potential in a whole new way that is 10 times better, 100 times more fruitful and transformational, and more than sustainable, regenerative, And the value and the significance of that transformation, the value and significance of, all right, so very simple. Okay, we have here a choice. Continue toward self-extinction or enable self-regeneration. What is worth more, right? It's so which we do not have. We do not have a way to tell the story that presents what is being made possible by these technologies in a way that clearly makes it much more valuable than the way we're doing it. And that, I think, is the key of us being able to bring in, move the consciousness of the people that have the resources, that have the money, into understanding that while this might not be an immediate resource in returns of investment, financial returns on investment, it is a tremendous way of avoiding self-extinction. It's in that, and that part of the narrative is what we need to figure out. We need to figure out how to move value, have value flow from the languishing economic ecosystems to a flourishing economic ecosystems. And I think there is a lot of the elements in here. But I would like to go through this process again, but instead of contextualizing it, the problem solutions, how about potential and possibilities?
Yes.
What becomes possible? How do we gain value in a whole new way? So
that
that's
is
what
that is also what Stefan proposes. So yeah, but that would be another effort, is to think peer production in an abstract way. Here we do it like that. I'm trying to justify the choice because we're doing it for IoPA, who are tool builders, and you do not build a tool if you don't have a problem in front of you, right? So this is specifically made for IoPA with IoPA.
Let's consider this, David.
Because we have to give them something, okay, that they could go to the bench and use this information to guide themselves to build a tool. So we have to give something that leads to something pragmatic, that leads to the production of a tool. So it's oriented towards their goal, right? But I understand we could have a larger conversation about peer production outside of the scope of IoPA.
Let me make a point to answer actually the question you're asking. That is different than, all right, so I understand, provide a problem so we can have a justification for coming together to create a solution. So the problem is the context for coming up with a solution. But how about simply focusing on how do we make everything more ideal than it is, right? How do we improve upon everything? How do we make everything better? And that is not about thinking of a problem, but imagining innovations. So it is in the imagining these innovations where we find a new context for the peer productions, for the production process, not be on resolving problems of demand, but creating opportunities and possibilities for new supply, for innovations. So that's the shift that I will propose.
Yes. No, it's very much appreciated, and there is always that a parallel thought process, right? It can coexist with this more pragmatic approach that is kind of embedded into a grant proposal to the European Commission, and has to demonstrate that you're spending public money to actually solve real problems. So that's the paradigm.
And also let me add that the crucial to making this work will be figuring out how can we measure the realization of those possibilities. How can we measure, what it will be once we are able to create and realize all these new possibilities. So there's a new story. And that becomes a matter of a vision.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, somebody wanted to interject.
Yeah, may I add something? I drew a sense of problem with what Jeff said in the fourth sector project in Lebanon. And this is something TB and I discussed several times, and I'll say it real quick. People are so used to the classic transactional mechanism. An example would be, do this task or a job, please, and I would pay you this much. And when we're moving into this new world, and this is where Jeff is saying we need to tell a story in order to make people simply understand, local farmers, local producers, that this is a new transactional mechanism. It's not money for work. As you guys were talking, we need the narrative that moves away from the dominance of monetary currency. Now, P2P is that new economic model, offers these new transactional models, but people are not used to them. So this is one of the problems we see in Lebanon. Like, what is this new transactional system? It's embedded. People are embedded to think that job for money, and now we're taking them somewhere else, and that shift is causing some issues.
Yeah. When we talk about moving away from the dominance of the monetary currency, some people can think that we're crazy. This is crazy talk. Okay, so what we are essentially saying, we are practicing at the Sensorica lab. I mean, the reality is what it is, and you rent a space, and the landlord asks for money to pay the rent. We give him money to pay the rent, but within the space there's economic activity, right? Meaning people get together to do something, maybe to develop, I don't know, some open source sensor, okay, or some green wall to grow plants, whatever. That's economic activity. This is people using resources together for a common goal. But are they paying each other? Okay, well, in most cases they're not. Okay, so there's innovation processes, there is fabrication, local fabrication processes that go on, education processes. These are economic processes, right? But there is no exchange. So why would you stop it? So you know what I'm saying? So let it flow. So when we at the Sensorica lab, when I think about stepping aside from monetary currencies, what I mean is that if you see money as an access to, okay, how can we provide an alternative to access to that doesn't require money? So you come in and you say, yeah, but so what? I still have to pay the rent. Yes, but you don't have to pay anymore for X and Y and Z. So you're saving money. Okay. So you're not making money, but you're saving money. You come to a project because you want to learn something and you're not paying for it. You come to a project because you want to be known, okay? You want to have a reputation that you may monetize later, whatever, but you want to accrue your reputation, okay? And so all these non-material or non-tangible and sometimes even tangible assets that you gain access to through a collaborative process to peer-to-peer, okay? It actually doesn't, in some cases, they don't make you money, but they still give you access to stuff that you would normally pay in capitalism for, right? So you're actually saving money. So that's what we're talking about. And the narrative here is like, well, the thing is not to eliminate monetary currency, because I think there will always be a need for monetary currency. The problem is that now monetary currency dominates access to almost everything you can think of in society. So can we, so it's not to attack and make money disappear from society, but it's to say that money don't do a good job in some areas, and there's a tyranny of the monetary system here, which is, access to some things can be mediated through some other processes. Why not? Like, why should money rule all access, and why can't we allow some other ways to access material resources or some other type of resources?
Can I chip in there, Tibi?
Yeah. So this is just to wrap up. This is real. This is real, and we're living it. And and it's not trying to be poor to live without money. It's to say, how can we exercise, build, and practice these new ways of accessing things that don't require money. And in doing that, you don't need to spend that money. You know what I'm saying? You can take your money and spend it for something else that is required, because you're still living capitalism. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I add something to that, Tibi? I think that's a really important point. I think it connects to what Jeff was saying, in the sense that, say you have the scenario of trying to minimize input, maximize output, which capitalism focuses on, but often this bit in the middle, it can be gamed just to make those things happen, right? But if you've got networks of networks, and we want stuff to be more local and not completely atomized and just replications of some North European idea, but something that's more contextual, something in the middle, like a process optimization measure. I think Jeff mentioned, how do you measure some of these things? Is if we're improving the processes of alignment, coordination, contextualization within the actual networks of networks. And there's ways that there can be sort of like this sort of value measure is happening within there. And it's not, because capitalism seems totally focused on metrics of what went in, what came out, and just trying to drive as much resource extraction as possible. But often that's, you know, that's why, ironically, a lot of the most innovative, frugal practices happen in India and places which are actually constrained from financial markets, because they're actually working a lot more within their own, you know, their own capacities, and they're actually working together. Whereas often in the West, it's kind of just swamped by whoever has access to capital, you know, and no one else can compete, you know. And
Yes,
you see
but
that
the difference there, you're totally right. These kind of ways of establishing economic processes that don't require money, they are still present today in places that we believe they're backwards. Okay, so now somebody would say, yeah, but wait, you want to go back in time in the Stone Age? And obviously things are possible, but without money, you're inefficient. That's the argument. Okay, so the whole idea here with these discussions is that here we have a new technology, okay, that can establish new processes that don't require money, and they're as efficient, maybe even more efficient than the processes that are enabled by money. Okay, so that's the realization, is that no, we're not saying to go backwards to informal economies. Okay, and I'm not even talking about barter, because that's just a made-up story, that money came to replace barter. That's a made-up story. I'm not even trying to say that. You know, so we're not saying that, you know, let's go back to a simple informal economy, an economy that people can manage at small scale. No, that's not about it. Is that we can have global scale economic processes set in motion that don't require money, based on these new tools. And it's not even cryptocurrency, because that's money, that's monetary currency. Okay, it's model, it's just digital money. It behaves exactly the same, the digital tokens. But it's more what Arthur Brooke is talking about when he says currencies, right? All these symbolic systems that have the power to establish flows and enable flows, right, of all sorts. So we're living that. I mean, this is not an abstraction. This is not at all an abstraction. Yesterday, a guy came to the lab and he says, "Do you have a printer? I want to print my resume. I'm looking for a job." And I said, "Yes." So I helped him build his resume, because it was like written like shit. Okay, I spent half an hour with this guy. I helped him put it nicely on paper. I printed it for him. I gave him 5 copies. And then he says, "How much should I pay?" I say, "You don't have to. You want to know what we're doing here?" So I spoke with him about Sensorica and what we're doing. The guy was so amazed. "I'm going to come back and work with you guys here." You see what I'm saying? So I gave him my time. Perfect. But one day he's going to be the guy that is going to map the floor of the lab while working on a project. Okay, so it's to sustaining the commons, okay, and getting involved in some other projects. So that's a non-monetary exchange. It's based on, I gave him a purpose. He's a new immigrant from Ghana. Okay, he comes to Canada. You know what I'm saying? So anyway,
you got a couple of hands up here. Just to
yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
wrap
Yeah,
things up.
I shouldn't be the one ranting. Yeah. So
and I know Godson has to go soon.
Yeah, Godson. Yeah, if you have to go, maybe we give you priority. And by the way, that guy was from Ghana, and so it's maybe back your alley somewhere. Okay, if you have nothing to say, then we can probably pass it to, I don't know. Tim had his
Jeff, they got hands up. Jeff.
Yeah, I know, Jeff. Yes, but Tim was also before.
Yeah, I can wait. Matt Slats, I think, or Jeff. Yeah.
Okay.
Matt, Matt, go ahead, Matt.
Thank you. I've been thinking a long time about not using money, and aside from the fact that sometimes that you can access things through your reputation, like just because you're really cool or really known or really appreciated, most of access is a process of exchange, which means I do something for you or for somebody else, and then you or somebody else does something for me. And that requires accounting.
Mm-hmm.
There was a comment earlier that avoiding money is inefficient, but we can argue with that a lot. Not only the definition of efficiency, because all efficiency is measured in money in economics, but also the global marketplace is a very, very efficient place, and money is how you access it. So if you avoid the global marketplace, of course, you're going to be inefficient in that you're not going to get as much for what you give. And one thing that slows that down immensely, of course, even in the global marketplace, is the system of payments and banking. I personally have a lot of emotional difficulties dealing with banks, but also there's a lot of time and know your customer and things like that, bouncing checks and so on, that mean banks are inefficient, as well as the payments they charge as well, and the whole process of invoicing as well, and so on. So we can, at some level, we can have a system of accounting for exchange that doesn't use money, and that will be more efficient because it avoids the middleman, the banking system. And that's what mutual credit is. There you go. I've got a chance to explain it. So mutual credit is for exchange, and that's why the sum total of all accounts in mutual credit is 0, because if I give you 10 and later you give me 10, at all times in that process, the total is 0. You've got plus 10 and I've got minus 10, and then it goes back. That's why it's accounting for exchange, because it's all around 0, and it starts on 0 and finishes on 0 when the exchange is complete. What makes those exchanges more efficient and less efficient is the size of the marketplace. I said already that the global marketplace is assumed to be the most efficient, and meanwhile the lets and the time banks and the small exchange groups that exist already are inefficient, because you can't get what you want very often in those small marketplaces. So if we want to have a more efficient and more useful system of exchange, a mutual credit accounting system is a very good approach, and it gives you this kind of halfway between money and not money, because you've got units of account, but it's not money and it's not issued. You just have a policy which says, well, this member can go so much into the negative before they have to start giving something back. I'll leave it there.
So for a mutual credit, okay, so when it comes to agencies, I just have a question before going to Jeff. because I want to tie it back to the main topic here. Agencies, so monetary currency, so fiat money, right? There's all sorts of incentives to cheat, to take the money and run, right? Is there a difference with mutual credits in terms of
Yes, definitely.
encouraging or discouraging that kind of opportunistic behavior to take the money and run?
The fiat money is, in its very intrinsic nature, a kind of property, and that means if you have it, it's yours, and it doesn't really matter where it comes from. Now, there are laws, know your customer laws, and other things which increasingly try to trace where the money comes from, but it's still regarded in the paradigm of your property, which means if you can steal it or if you can get it anyhow, it's yours. But once you see the whole ledger, the mutual credit system, you can see that anything you have is something that someone else owes. And furthermore, you can see all the transactions which led you to have your claim on that marketplace. And in the way that I design them anyway, these are not immutable ledgers, and what the community owes you is not absolute. And everything is open to negotiation through a process of governance, which can be done on a reasonable scale, especially using the Credit Commons protocol, in which groups are nested. Does that answer your question?
Partially. So why? So you essentially you cannot take the money and run because that's tied to a transaction. That money that you have.
Well, you also can't run out of the community. The money isn't worth anything out of the community. So you can only take the money and spend it within the group. And you're not anonymous there. If you've taken the money, everyone knows how you came by it. They can even refuse to trade with you if
Exactly.
they
That's a
know
very interesting property. That's very relevant to this topic. Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very interesting. Okay. Jeff?
Okay, so yeah, tying to what you just said, when we're thinking about any complementary currency or any currency model, we also have to include in conversation the context, the relational context in which we are developing that currency as the means to accounting for value exchange. So so then if we want to begin to consider how can we begin to develop peer-to-peer material peer-to-peer production economies or hubs or ecosystems, then we can consider that there are going to be local communities that are going to be the participants on developing these local maker spaces. And the community then in itself, we can look at the community to become the investors for the seed fiat, for the seed money that is going to make it that is going to provide the sustainability for the initial participants to begin to bring the reality of a market space and to begin the production. If we look at beginning to do that in multiple locations and multiple places, so we can think about the concept of triggering the emergence of many market spaces, local market spaces at the same time, and one day we can create the network effect, while at the same time we look for local communities to fund the development of each of the marketplaces. Then we have a way to harness the network effect for this campaign that puts it all together. And I think understanding that it's not either complementary currency or fiat, but both, and that there initially is a hybrid. We definitely, what we're looking for is to make a bridge, but we got to start somewhere. And what Theo just said is that well, you are not going to be fully compensated for everything that you need to pay with fiat. You're going to be compensated for the minimal, and you're going to be saving in many other things, or you're going to be provided with new training that is going to provide you with more skills, so that you can get into a position of becoming an expert and becoming an actual producer with a career with certifications. So I think that we need to think about the process as an emergent process into, and how we tell the story of how this is going to emerge, and with certain waves of participation and initial minimal funding, as we then become more and more capable of self-sustaining, of regenerating the process as we keep on growing and we keep trying to leverage and harness this networks effect that we will be able to begin to give birth to. And I think that's kind of the story, that's kind of the narrative that I think that we would need to create that vision for beginning to help people expand their awareness of what is possible, and then begin to show how these possibilities do create a much better situation for everyone than what we have now. And that is going to incentivize people to be willing to fund it without expectations of just purely fiat or financial, because they're going to be earning. And if everybody contributes a little bit of fiat for the sake of all of us moving into capitalizing more of our potential, that's a win-win for everybody as well. And I do high hopes that this is the kind of opportunity that we have in front, that we can begin to put together and bring it into reality.
Yeah. Okay, we can wrap it up. I don't know if Lynn wants to have another word, or Brand, or Matthew, because we created this artifact in the middle here with some notes, and we'll ping you. We're gonna put it in order. We'll ping you if you want to add some other ideas, so you have a chance to contribute. This is just a starter, right? It's just get the conversation going. Lynn, if you have something else to add, or
not really. I was just writing a note because I do have to go.
Okay.
But I'm interested in thinking more about how to take this down a level towards reality, and how to merge the kind of ideas that people have coming from their experiences with some groups on the ground that could collaborate in starting to create some of this infrastructure, and in the process how to do so without having to make lots of decisions ourselves. Like, I think we can't do this giant build it and they will come kind of a thing. We need to work totally in collaboration with people trying to do this in their different situations and different cultures, and et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, try to create something that can work for more than one situation, if at all possible, you know. Anyway, so that's my kind of my where do we take it from here without getting stuck into kind of a like an endless, this can be endless because there are so many ideas and good ideas, but how do we start making this happen without complete knowledge and without complete agreement, you know? Anyway, that's my 2 cents, and I gotta take off. And thank you all very much. This is very interesting.
Okay. I don't know if Matthew or Brent have something else to say, to add. Because I'm just conscious here about Vinny and his next event, which will probably happen pretty soon.
Yeah.
Could I add a cultural layer when it comes to the sharing of resources, TB. I have a infographic here, and I might read it a second. And I think that this is maybe will generate a different vision for you guys when it comes to, you know, you see here in Brazil, we are starting to weave, netweave, a cultural Web3 regenerative protocol called RERE, regenerative resources. And the main dynamics is making everybody understand that everybody is a complex being, as nature is a complex thing, right? We are nature. Nature is complex. So we are abundant by nature. Also, in terms of nature design, we are abundant beings, right? Abundant species. So everybody's have anything to share without the necessity to trade it or to negotiate it. You just share what is abundant for you in terms of resources, right? And so we are working with this concept going directly to the project itself. So each project has some abundant resources that they don't need to trade it or to sell it, but nothing like that. So with this RERE cultural Web3 protocol, what we want to make is to create this ambience, this mutual understanding that we can create common pool of shared resources based on abundance logic of each person and each project. And we've been doing this all over Brazil, generating all types of common pool of shareable resources, such as this one that you guys are seeing here, that 4 projects, they contributed in designing, in logistics, in venue, in organic products, and dev, and NFTs, the creation of fiat and crypto. And if we're going to do this event around feijoada, that's the typical dish from Brazil, we would have to, let's say, literally invest at least $10,000. But with this dynamics, we were able to not to invest, not to have to pay for all services because people came and shared what is abundant for them. So I just want to add this for you guys to understand that we can have similar things running within this project too. But as Ricky said when he was here, this is a rite of passage. Like you have to perceive yourself as not as a blank canvas, you know, a white canvas without any types of things to contribute. Only money can fulfill it. No. We can do it this way too. So that's my 2 cents to wrap up our second workshop here, Timmy.
Jeff is looking very puzzled until I can't hear. You're muted, Jeff.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of share a possibility that came with what Lynn says and what Vinny just said, is that maybe the actually practical way to go about this is to begin to find 10 cases for local development of material peer-to-peer market spaces, and tying them together with what Raiki is doing with the local developments, and so imagine that we can converge, right? What Seeds is doing, what Raiki is doing, with what Vin is doing in Brazil, and whomever have here, like David, you might be aware of local cases where they are seeking to develop these marketplaces in a network, or marketplaces that are ready to begin to collaborate in this network that we want to create, and actually find 10 communities, or how many we can find, that we can develop a campaign to deploy all this infrastructure, but we do it together. So we create a campaign where we all go together at seeking to realize the possibilities, not with all the solutions because we don't have them, but to begin to elicit what wants to emerge, what is ready to emerge.
Yeah, I think there's
yeah.
room for that in IoPA. Like you saw, there's a guy from Africa in contact with many makerspaces there. So it's a sort of it's an alliance. It's Internet of Action Alliance, and they're connected with all these local spaces where they actually do some innovation and some production, 3D printing, CNCs, and all that. Some of them, they're incubators of, I don't know, more traditional businesses. They have that orientation, but some of them, they're also humanitarian oriented. So I think, yeah, if you're interested in facilitating that kind of stuff and bringing seeds along with you, I think you could build a bridge with IoPA. So just join the forum and and start an initiative. You see what I'm saying? Or start a conversation, and you have something that forms. And what we're doing here, we're just trying to inform the process of tool building, right? Yeah, I would go to Tim because he raised his hand for a long time, and then he gave it to somebody else.
I was just gonna basically say that as I've been listening and thinking what I wanted to comment on, I've been writing it up, and if people don't mind, I'll paste a massive comment into the chat, which will cover what I wanted to say. But I didn't want to do it without checking if people thought that would be okay. It's addressing this rites of passage concept that Reiki introduced, and that's when I originally was wanting to reply to, because I put a little 100%, or plus 100 following that, but I had also kind of projected maybe a little bit into what he was or extending it a little bit, whether he was going to go there or not, I don't know, but to just fully ratify that 100% was okay. That message is too long. I can't post that. Basically, what I'm getting at is that that there is this threshold aspect, which is at a much broader scale that Jeff really alludes to, right? And there's a fancy word for this in sort of sociological thinking or whatever, which is called an interregnum, which is this idea of this threshold between major epochs of kind of the structures of the productive capacities and economics and politics and social systems between times. Like you think about what the kind of change that the Industrial Revolution introduced, and the kind of thing that's talked about here is really also at that kind of level. And so I think that whole rites of passage framing can be a really powerful process or mechanism or making space attitude that would be a unifying layer or thread of dialogue across really different spaces, locally, contextually, what have you. So I'll break my little writing into parts and post it as best I can here, but that's what it's addressing. That's what it's addressing, and so I kind of added to it as the conversation went on, so it became a pretty long. So I'll post that. Thanks.
Vinny, I wonder if we can capture the side notes. Yeah, so let's go to Brent and see, because he's an invitee.
Yes, Stephen was going to go, but set his hand up. But
well, he's part of the facilitators, so I could give priority to people that are just invited. Yes.
Sure. I guess to follow up on kind of what I was saying earlier, like, well, I don't know. I don't know if this is what you believe, but things like capitalism and like traditional universities and I guess guilds, which medieval guilds is what they came from, I believe. That's kind of the old paradigm, but like peer-to-peer and the tools that you have enable new different things. So I think as you're saying, like the roadblocks and limitations that you have with taking things from the old time and finding a new one might not exactly translate over. But you'd have new possibilities. So
I think credentials and reputation is very important topic. We touched on it on the last one. Reputation systems, because there was somebody from neighborhoods with the group. It's very important when it comes to agencies, right? How do you keep in check people that would like to move sideways and not pull in the same direction with the group? Not respect the agreements, the initial agreements, not respect the social contract, right? So I think, yeah, credentials and reputation, they should be tied together, because credentials is I'm doing that, and reputation is like how well he's doing that. Yes, I know how to 3D print. Yeah, but are you a good collaborator? Are you also helping others learn? These are things that are extremely important in a collaborative setting like the Sensorica lab. Okay, just knowing how to 3D print is not enough. Knowing how to 3D print while being helpful with others and taking part of stewarding the space, that's interesting. That's interesting. You see what I'm saying?
Okay. Yeah, I agree with this, but how do you deal with things which the guilds and the things where originally professionalization was designed for, was occupational closure? Like you have a tribe of people and you don't want Joe over here who doesn't go through your systems and to be able to operate, basically. So unless you're licensed with the authorities, you can't do anything. You can't participate. And they can charge whatever rent they want to go through that. But you can learn the skills outside of that. As long as you can fit your reputation and that you know that.
Yeah, I totally got what you're saying, but folks, it's important to understand that we are like babies, like born early born babies trying to touch an elephant that we don't know yet. We have some we have some understanding of it, but we don't really have the practice of it. So that said, in this Taudao experience that has been occurring for 2.5 years now, over 300, 400 people already had the experience to open themselves to understand what is value, what is wealth, what is how you co-create things, and how you signify work, how you reframe work with another lenses, right? We do something called conscious access to distribute a decentralized shareable fund, for instance. There's no centralization and no technology for that. That's all human related in a coordination, interaction and coordination way. Interact and coordination way. So one of the things, TB, that we use, TB knows this, is recognition. Recognition is not reputation, it's different things. So when you're doing the recognition of someone that is net weaving the value proposal of the work that you're doing is different from you gaining reputation because you have the you want the conditions to be able to operate a 3D printer, or because you're going to scale up, I don't know, to have, let's say, the authority to access whatever equipment is in the makerspace or the fab lab. So we're talking about different things. It's not the same thing, see? So yeah, I understand that for a makerspace or a fab lab or a hackerspace, whatever, is important. This thing about credentials and reputation, but in a very peer-to-peer complex way, recognition, when you recognize the other, what the other is doing for the value proposal as a whole, is as important or even more important than reputation and credentials. You see, what I'm trying to say is that we really, first we confuse the lines, we confuse the understanding. They're different things, they're not the same thing. So, and it's important, it's relevant for us to to understand this, because if we don't, we're still going to repeat the same experiment with different colors and at different stages, and with almost similar metrics to it, you see? So that's my other 2 cents for us to finish up here.
I am sad that we didn't have the time to delve deeper into tokenomics, you know, which is a very interesting layer on top of currency, right? So you can have mutual credit, you can have currencies, but tokenomics is an interesting economic add-on to a currency. All right, so that's what Web3 is doing, and it's you know, because in the traditional world these things are dissociated, since you don't have programmable money tokens and with smart contracts and stuff. You know, the economic rules are in another realm, okay, totally dissociated from your currency. So by tying the game with the currency very mechanically, it gives new possibilities, because now your currency is not just that property that somebody can take and run. You know, it's associated with all sorts of conditions and rules. So let's say when you gain a token, it says a lot about why you have that token, how did you get that token, in what circumstances you got that token, right? So I think it opens the door for very interesting tools to be built. What do you think about that, Matthew? Being able to tie these economic rules to the currency itself.
I wouldn't use some of the same language that you've used.
Okay.
And my emphasis is on building systems of exchange, as I've said, and they don't. I also don't use the currency metaphor as much, because what Arthur Brock is saying with currency is that basically anything moves, you can track it with a token, and then you build up a lot of information about what's happening in the system. And that's very different to trying to do exchange properly. So yes, with a mutual credit system, you can put rules on it. You can put usually transaction fees or other conditions, but I'm less interested in making those systems very interesting, because I want to do exchange properly. And the other things, movements of all the different kinds of tokens, is not something I'm specialized in or even especially interested in. Lynn, in value flows, is tracking.
I can't hear. I don't know if you. I
No,
can't
back.
hear you. Yes. So lean with value flows is tracking
all different kinds of resources.
Yeah.
Not so much, I think, still here.
Yeah.
I can't see it.
Oh no, Lean
not
is
so
not here.
much the. So she's tracking the real world resources rather than the kind of reputation systems and those tokens, although they could be tracked in value flows. And so she might bring a different perspective to. Could we call it gamification? What you were just talking about,
Yeah.
like adding all of those rules.
Yes.
But again, I think her emphasis is gamification either, and maybe Art Brock is a good person to talk to about that, or all the people in cryptocurrencies who are interested in badges and multiple different kinds of tokens.
Yeah, but I understand. If you only focus on the exchange, then that layer may be irrelevant, because you only want to enable that process of exchange.
My connection keeps dropping, so I'm reliable from now on.
Okay. Yes. So maybe we can open this up in a discussion. But anyway, yeah. I would wrap it up here unless somebody has an itch to add something interesting to the discussion.
Can I add one little thing here, Tibi? Just like this talk about liminal space, but like could be the space between transactions, and it seems that that's where there's a need for metrics in a way that we're all struggling with. I mean, Jeff was mentioning that, and trying to find a way to where's there capacity for resolving process questions, and how is that measured? And I think in some ways that's measured in the current space by brand and share price. Basically, a brand is the intangible ability for you to trust the process quality of the supplier in question. And there's a question then, how can we find ways to be it through Wilbur's approach. I also think, the infusion space could be an interesting way to be able to check in a configuration at this more grounded level, specific level, come back and get a sense of what kind of process configurations are there and how robust are there. And maybe something like free energy or something could be used as a metric or free energy minimization might be a way to get a handle on that. But there's something in this liminal space between that is intractable and is outside of the transaction, but is actually often key. Certainly often key in terms of what happens, like you say, in a year or two. You tend to basically often buy something from Apple because you think it's going to work in 3 years, and I can make sure that if something happens, I can get it fixed, That's not happening at the moment of the transaction, but it's implicit, So I thought I'd add that. There might be something, that's for another conversation, but it ties into this process question and how to understand in a more grounded way what the actors are doing, but then to be able to come back into the abstracted way with some sort of metrics or some sort of way to gain some insight into the quality of the process.
Mm-hmm. Noted. Anybody else? Or we let Vinicius free with the. I'm gonna stop the recording anyway. So let me stop recording and.